Well, hello, everyone. Thank y'all for coming. This is our student leader training, and today we're going to talk about navigating a student leadership role on campus. So first, I'm going to start by introducing myself. Some of y'all may not know me. I am Emily Pilot, and I am the coordinator of Student Services and Res Hall. My office is in Wilder Student Union. I also live on campus because I supervise Carney Johnston.
And I'm Beth Ann Simpson, Senior Coordinator of Student Services. And it's kind of a catch-all of student services that happen outside the classroom, everything from residence life to student leadership involvement, career services, other student resources. So we're offering this because our student employees and leaders need it, but we wanted to offer it across campus so that we could just use our resources more effectively and not have to repeat. You might hear some of this information later in your own individual training, but we hope that what we covered today is something that we can all benefit from as you do your leadership or employee roles across campus.
And since we do have people from different areas on campus, let's just take a few moments to introduce yourself, tell us your name and what office you're going to be working for next semester.
Good morning.
My name is Dave, and I'll be an RA.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be I'm Daniela, and I'll work with
I'm Kale. I am a resident assistant. I'll also be on vacation.
I'm Kim. I'm a library assistant, an orientation guide, and then I'll also work with student services there. I'm Danielle, and I don't really know
Where I think you're an orientation guide, right? So
Yeah.
you'll work in admissions with Adam and
Okay.
that's what your role is. Well, and you'll learn more about that role later.
If y'all on Zoom would like to introduce yourselves, I don't know how we can get the volume away.
They might not be in a place to.
Oh, there's
Hi.
Which I can't see her.
Do I
Why
wait?
she's in the corner.
Oh, but we can't hear her.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Oh.
so yeah, I can hear you a little bit.
Okay. What about now? I'll just type it.
Maybe it's because it's on there.
It's just coming out of the computer.
Yeah, it's not
speakers.
coming out here.
Anyways, guys, that's Bailey.
That's Bailey Jackson. We don't know why we can't hear that, but you can hear other things. And I don't know if Kiana is in a place to introduce herself, but I know that she works for the library.
Yes.
And then Bailey, I think her role, she's served in many roles on campus, but right now I think she's an orientation guide. Yes.
And thank you all for joining us on Zoom. So today we're going to talk about being your best self, which involves commitment, communication, the 3 Ps, which is professionalism, punctuality, and positivity. And then we're going to move into Beth Ann presenting, and she will talk about your role and responsibility on campus, customer service, the chain of command, and connecting with first-year students, which is what a lot of y'all are going to be doing in the fall. And then we're also going to talk about tagging in other resources, other departments on campus. All right, being your best self, practicing commitment, effective communication, professionalism, punctuality, and positivity in your everyday life. Before we get into this, what kind of comes to your mind when you think about being your best self in a professional environment when it comes to a on-campus position? That's good. y'all feel comfortable talking and interacting. We don't want this to be us just talking at you. So if anything comes to mind, there's no wrong answers. You can just spit it out. All right. One of the main things of putting your best self forward and being your best self is commitment. So a commitment is an agreement or pledge to do something. You made a commitment to your role whenever you applied for that position and accepted it. Some of the important aspects of commitment are to always assess your current commitments before deciding to take on additional roles. I'm sure all of y'all thought about what classes you would have next semester. If you have an outside employment position that's not on campus, and how you would balance all of that in taking on another role. This is really important. That way you don't stretch yourself too thin, and then you're not able to put your best self forward in your different positions. Also, do not take on roles and responsibilities half-heartedly. I know that it's easy whenever you see these jobs advertised and you're like, yeah, I'd love to have some extra money, you know. But if you're not thinking it through and it's not something you're really interested in, something you really can put the effort into, and you're just doing it for a paycheck or to put on a resume, that kind of shows through in the work that you do. Make sure that you're always doing your best, as that is a show of commitment to your job. All right, breaking a commitment. How many of y'all have had to break a commitment before? Okay, that's a hard place to be. Whenever you agree to do something, of course, you never know what may come up later on. Some things are out of your control, and breaking a commitment sometimes just has to happen. Even if you don't want to, in the event that you're no longer able to fulfill a commitment, just make sure that you're providing proper notification and communication to your supervisor. An example of this is if you're having to leave a job role, it's good to give at least like 2 weeks notice, because then your supervisor, they're having to find someone else to take on your responsibilities. Do y'all have any questions? Comments, stories? That's okay. All right, communication. Giving, receiving, or exchanging ideas, information, signals or messages through appropriate media, enabling individuals or groups to persuade, to seek information, to give information, or to express emotions. So what are some examples of communication that you use in everyday life? Phone call. So there's 2 types of communication. I'm sure there's more, but there's 2 types that we're going to talk about today. Virtual communication. This is a lot of what you guys named. So texting, emailing, phone calls. This effective communication includes contacting the proper person in the proper manner. So if you had a question about campus rep and their services, you wouldn't email Miss Lisa in the library, really. So contacting the proper person in the proper manner is really important. So if you have a question about services on campus, you can, of course, go to our office because we put out the e-news, but you can also go directly to the source. And if you need to know something about campus rec, you can send a proper professional email to Mr. Jim in campus rec. Another part of virtual communication that's really important is checking your email often. So when you're sending an email to another department on campus, about when do y'all expect to get a response? Like ideally? In a day or 2? Okay. So keeping that in mind, how often do you think you need to check your email? Every day. That's what we like to tell our students. I think that that's important for everyone, but especially if you're working as a student staff. There may be important updates that we need to give you about your position. You may be getting questions from other students about your position, anything. So really checking your email once a day, that's pretty much the bare minimum. If you can set a time during the day that you can really sit down and look through things, that's a good thing to do. But sometimes people like to check it more than that. Maybe they check it in the morning and then they check it again in the evening when they're rounding out their day. Another thing that's important is writing professional emails. What are some important aspects of a professionally written email? Greeting. Did you say that? Okay, it's hard to tell who's talking. What else? Right.
People care more about that than others.
Right.
And so it's good to always err on the side of caution and be over formal with people.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Y'all think of anything else? Yes. A good closer. Yes.
What about punctuation? How do y'all feel about like exclamation points and capital letters? I would watch those, like I can still remember if a student has like sent me an all caps email like yelling about, like they were upset. And you know, that tone comes across when you use capital letters, so just be mindful of that.
Yeah.
And know when maybe it's appropriate not to send an email, and it might be best to have like a phone or in-person conversation, right?
Mhm.
So kind of knowing what is appropriate for them.
I'm sure even in your interactions with friends and family, certain conversations are just better to be had in person. Texting and other written communication like that, it's easy to get confused or misunderstand someone's tone or purpose or something like that. So that is very important, knowing when to pick up the phone and call or even schedule a meeting with someone.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing, it's like, and I tell my staff this, that there's certain times if you need something immediate and you need, maybe that's a text, maybe that's appropriate for your staff and y'all establish that. And then there's other times like you need to, maybe you tried the email and you haven't had a response, then I would pick up the phone and call, or go by and talk to someone. Make sure you have tried those avenues, to reach them and not just assume someone's not responding, right? So, and I'll say something about the RSVP.
Okay. Another thing about the emails is a lot of times the people that you're emailing in these different departments, they get tons and tons of emails every single day. It's good to give grace, give them a little time to respond if it isn't an urgent matter, but also that's where that subject line is really important. So if you need something ASAP or it's very important, make sure that you put that in the subject. There's even a way of tagging emails as urgent emails. It puts a little exclamation mark next to it. When you're searching through an inbox and you have a bunch of emails to sort through, it's helpful to be able to very quickly gather what information is needed by looking at that subject and seeing it in the first couple lines of the email. Don't ramble on for a little bit and then tuck in what you actually need at the end. Go ahead and get to the point concisely. All right. How many of y'all have a voicemail box set up? Okay, so maybe like half. I know that may not seem super important. So when you first got your cell phone, you were setting everything up, you're like, oh, I don't really need to set up the voicemail box. But as you're in a student leadership position and you're giving your cell phone number out for professional reasons, and you're calling offices and asking for a call back, it's always helpful to have that voicemail box set up. I can't tell you how many times a student has called our office. We've called back to try to get in touch with them, and then we can't even leave a message letting them know what they needed, that information, or how they can contact us again because they don't have a voicemail box. So I really encourage y'all to set that up. All right. How many of y'all utilize your Outlook calendar that's tagged to your Memphis email? And so again, about half. This is really important as a student, but specifically as a student staff member. For instance, when we're trying to schedule something like this training, it is very helpful if your calendar is utilized. Because then if we're trying to schedule it for a certain time and you have, for instance, a class at that time, it'll show that you're unavailable. So if you haven't explored that, it takes a little bit to understand, but it's relatively easy to figure out. And I know y'all are probably tech savvy, so just take a moment to look at that. It's really helpful for us, and I really do think it would be helpful for you as well, because the next thing that we're going to talk about is RSVPs. You want to? So we sent out event requests for this event to our desk assistants for sure. I'm not sure about the others from different areas, but whenever it sends out that calendar invitation and you accept it, you can have it where it automatically adds it to your Outlook calendar. And then like 30 minutes, 15 minutes before that event, it'll send you a reminder. Makes it really easy to keep track of your schedule and your commitments. And also it helps us if you accept those, because then we know how many people we're looking at. For instance, we were providing meals for this training here. It helps us to know how many heads we're looking at.
And I was gonna say, I know I'm tempted when I get a notification just to accept, so it'll clear out. I don't like little red notifications anywhere on my phone. But please be mindful that when you're clicking on those and you're accepting or not, like make sure it is something you truly can come to. And I know I can't speak, but I'm gonna give you a perfect example. Is today. So we planned for box lunches or meals for 17, I believe. And so we obviously don't have 17 here. And that's okay, we'll adjust, but that RSVP, and I know everybody's communicated to differently, so we might have sent that to our staff, but maybe your supervisor didn't do it in that way. But and things come up, things like those that are online with us today communicated with us before, so we can send them the link. But it just helps us plan, and it's considerate to those that are planning a training or any kind of event, so that we make sure we plan appropriately. So keep that in mind when you're accepting those things. They impact people on the other side as they're planning. And so I just wanted to give you a real life example of today. We're going to have a surplus of food. Take two, take one home, something like that. But be mindful when you RSVP the importance of that RSVP.
Do y'all have any questions about that Outlook calendar? How to utilize that? Okay. All right. In-person communication. Some effective communication in person includes speaking clearly. So you of course know it's hard to get your point across, get your questions answered if someone is having trouble understanding you. I know sometimes masks can make that a little difficult. You got to speak a little bit louder, a little bit more clearly. But that's always important. If you're working a desk position, whether that's in the library or in the residence hall, or you're leading tours as an orientation guide, you want to make sure that those students are understanding what you're saying. So speak clearly, speak at the right volume, make adjustments if you're in a loud area, just to make sure that you're heard. Utilizing proper eye contact. So how many of y'all get nervous in new situations and sometimes want to look at the floor or look to the side? Anybody deal with that? I'll be honest, I deal with that sometimes. It's hard to look people in the eye if you're uncomfortable, but it's very important when you're talking to people who are getting their impression of the school and the students that are here while they're coming through for tours or coming into the residence hall. So looking someone in the eye helps them understand that you really are listening to them and interested in what they have to say. All right. Utilizing professional body language. So this means don't slump, Don't cross your arms like this because that closes you off and makes you look unapproachable. Don't put your head down on your desk, etc., etc. Can y'all think of any other examples of things that maybe you shouldn't do in a professional work environment as far as your body language? Right? Don't close yourself off to someone who's trying to talk to you. Make sure that you're facing them as they're speaking with you. Don't turn to the side or turn away from them. Something that a lot of people do when they're nervous, and I know that I've had to try to cut this out, is you'll go from foot to foot, kind of like dancing. It makes you look like you're uncomfortable. So a little bit of movement is fine. You don't have to be a robot, but just be aware of what you're doing. Kind of consciously think about that, especially in those experiences where you're presenting or giving a tour. All right, and give your full attention when it is required. Just like you said, don't look at your phone. If you're sitting at a desk and you're working on homework and someone comes in, make sure that you are turning your attention to them, figuring out what they need, getting them settled, and then you can go back to what you were doing. Y'all have any?
I was just gonna add about the phone. I try to talk to my student leaders about this. Been in a Tiger Leadership Institute, you probably heard this from me. But this, even being, let's say you're not even on it, but you're dealing with a student at orientation or a parent, or you're at one of our desks and you're sitting there helping a customer or a student or anybody who walks in the door. Even if you're not on it and you have it in your hand or you have it on your desk and it's open, this still says to them, you're not the most important thing in the room, or you don't have my full attention, because this is still taking some of your attention if it has to be in your hands. So I would just encourage you, if you're an orientation guide and you're running around campus and it has to be with you, stick it in that back pocket so that it's not right here in your hand. Put it in a purse. If you're working our desk, even a simple thing like this, you might not have a place to stash it, but even if you flip it over, it kind of just says like, okay, just like she said about the computer. Okay, you now have my undivided attention. Because this still says, you're not fully there. I mean, I care, but not completely, right? So just be mindful of that with these things. They're really great resources and tools, but they can also be a barrier. So.
And I understand that it can kind of be like a comfort device. I don't know if this is something that everyone does, but if you're in a situation where maybe you don't know that many people and you're not wanting to be approached or engaged in conversation, you may pull out that phone and all you're doing is scrolling. You're not really doing anything, but it's that comfort there. So if you have it in your hand, you'll be more likely to turn to that and start doing something like that. So like you said, put it in a back pocket or face down on the table. Do you have any questions, comments? If you would like to know a little bit more about effective communication, we do have an Adulting 101 series on our Instagram page, and one of them is about effective communication. So if you go to UML_SS on Instagram, and then go to the IGTV section, which is the middle one, it's that, I think it's the first video that pops up. How many of y'all follow us on Instagram? All right.
This is now time to get out your phone.
Yes, get out that phone and follow us on Instagram. It's great for getting information about the campus in general. It is put out by our office specifically, but it has information from a lot of different areas. All right, the 3 Ps: professionalism, punctuality, and positivity. All right, professionalism. Make sure that you are presenting yourself professionally. And this can include anything from dressing appropriately for the job, ensuring you are well-groomed, and also being mindful of your workspace. So we know that everyone here is from a different area, and your appropriate dress may be different depending on the circumstance. So orientation guides, y'all have uniforms.
Or t-shirts.
Yeah.
They usually have the night, coordinates, but it's kind of.
Right. So appropriately for you guys would be that, your uniform. Appropriately for the RA position, it can include a bunch of different things because you're an RA all the time. But there are certain things where you may need to dress differently. For example, on move-in day, when you're making an impression to all the new students coming in. This isn't a job where you have to be fancy, you have to wear a blazer and slacks or something like that. But you want to represent our office well and represent the university. So sometimes that may be a Memphis polo and jeans. It might be a welcome t-shirt. It could be anything like that. And then some of y'all are desk assistants. And that job can be casual. You're there, who knows what different hours of the day. You could be working midnight to 2 a.m. But important thing to remember is even though you can be casual, there's a line between casual and what do you call it, like lounge wear. So you wouldn't be coming down in your pajamas, in a shower cap, house slippers. That kind of stuff needs to be reserved for your own space. So a Memphis tee is fine, jeans is fine, but just be aware of where that line kind of is.
And I always tell my students too that, especially if you're working a desk, you might feel like it's super casual and no one comes through here. It's just our resident. It can be chill. And for the most part, I mean, we want you to be comfortable there, but you just never know. We've had the president of the university just pop in and want to give a tour, see a tour of Kearney, or someone from the community pop in. So you just don't know who's visiting and who might pop in your space. So that's why it's important to just be aware of how you are presenting yourself on behalf of the university.
And ensuring you're well-groomed just means you wouldn't roll out of bed and come into the desk. Make sure you're doing the things that you would do before you go to class or something like that. Making sure you're brushing your hair, that kind of thing. And be mindful of your workspace. So the best example I have of this is the front desk in Kearney. Some of you other ones might work at a desk in the library or something like that. But if you have brought food to the desk, which we do allow for the most part, you don't need to have it all strewn out over the desk, all of your books and paperwork everywhere, a drink in the way of the card swiper. Just make sure that you're keeping your area neat and tidy as much as you can, and then disposing of things that are trash afterwards. Because again, you never know who could come through. The president of the university comes through and our front desk is a wreck and there's trash everywhere and it looks unorganized. It sends a bad message. Any questions? All right, punctuality. Show up on time or early if that's applicable. I know there's certain things where early isn't really acceptable. For instance, if you know that the person you're meeting with is having back-to-back appointments, there's no need to show up early. Just make sure you're there on time. But if you know that there's something that you're going to have to do once you get there, whether that's preparing yourself or making sure that you have materials, just get there a couple minutes early. Set up a calendar or alarms with reminders. So this brings back up the topic of Outlook. So if you have appointments that you've RSVP'd for in Outlook, you can get reminders for those. If you don't want to utilize Outlook calendar, just set an alarm for yourself. That way you're not forgetting about your commitments. If you absolutely cannot avoid being late or missing an appointment, make sure that you are giving proper notification. If you know that you're running late, just go ahead and send some kind of communication, whether that's a text message or an email or giving someone a call. That way they know and they can prepare for that. Any questions? All right, positivity. you should always report to work with a positive attitude. There may be days where you're tired or you are burned out, but that positive attitude is really important. And sometimes, even if you have to fake it till you make it, sometimes if you kind of force yourself to be a little bit more peppy, it can make you feel better sometimes. Make sure that you're greeting fellow students. This helps foster community on our campus. So orientation guides especially, this is going to be really important that you guys have a positive, energetic attitude. No one's going to want to come to this campus if our cream of the crop, best of the best orientation guides are bored and act like they don't really want to be there. They're not going to want to be here either. Speak about your employment in a positive way. There may be problems that you have, maybe complaints. It's important that you can always, what is it that you say, Beth Ann, vent up? You can always vent up. So if you have complaints, yes, if you have complaints, stuff that needs to be handled, you can vent up to your supervisor and let them know what bothers you, but never vent down. So if you're a desk assistant and you're dealing with things, you don't need to just be talking to anybody in the residence hall that'll listen about how much you hate your job and you can't stand this and you can't stand that. It creates a bad environment. Any questions? Social media is also an important thing to keep in mind. Never put the university or your department on blast on social media. If you have things that you need to air out and discuss, you need to go directly to the source. Social media just really isn't a place for that.
And depending on your position across campus, it might be in the conditions of your employment and expectations. I know that it's happened in the past where someone was in a position on campus and because of some social media activity, they were asked to step down from that. So just be mindful that those things are, your supervisor can see those things or has the potential to, so be mindful of that. And obviously there's just other avenues to communicate that. There's other places, right time, right place, and there's a chain of command to go through, and so totally respect that. And I feel like there was something else I was gonna say. Oh, and I also want to say, like, you're students first, you're human beings with lots on your plate and lots going on. And so I would just encourage you, there are gonna be days you're not positive, about your job or positive about your life circumstances. And I would just encourage, I know those that work for us, like, come to us, come to someone, talk about what's going on in your life, we'll meet you where you are. And if we need to figure out something else, get a replacement for the day, or whatever we need to do, communicate. We're team players and we want to serve you, and we know that this isn't the only thing on your plate. And so we recognize that. And so just be good communicators about what's going on with your life, and we'll do our best to honor that and work around it.
I think authenticity is really important just in life in general. So if you are upfront with people and let them know what's going on, a lot of times they'll work with you. And authenticity is important. We don't want you to put on a fake face. Just in general, positivity is important if you can manage it. If it's a day when you can't, like Beth Ann said, talk to someone. Oh no, my video. Oh, never mind. Know how to make it play?
I never did when we put it in
Mhm.
And it's on the Google Drive. I didn't save it separately. Do you need to pull it up? I never did play it.
It's like 3:40. All right. Does everybody have their 3 sheets of box paper and a pen or pencil?
Did everybody get one?
Okay. This activity is going to be about time management. And if y'all haven't been in this room before, there are little things on the side that you can pull up if you need something to write on. Okay, if everybody's ready, on your first sheet of box paper, I want you to fill in your routine activities that you do on a regular, everyday basis. This can be eating, this can be checking your email, this can be classes, sleeping, and each of those boxes represents an hour. So if you spend an hour, eating, put eating in one of those boxes. You spend 7 hours sleeping, put sleeping in 7 of those boxes. And just make sure that you have all of your routine activities put down in those boxes. Does that make sense? I'm gonna give you about 5 minutes. And if y'all are watching on Zoom and you have a spare sheet of paper or a spare 3 sheets of paper, if you draw 24 boxes on that sheet of paper, you can do the same activity. If you have any questions, you can put it in the chat. And y'all can look up when you're done. That way I kind of engage. Is everybody done? Okay. On your second sheet of paper, I want you to think about all of your non-productive time, your time wasters. If you included this in your routine sheet, you don't have to include it again. But this is how much time you spend scrolling on your phone, how much time you spend watching TV, how much time you spend making TikToks. I don't know. This is your non-productive time. And do it the same way. Each box represents an hour. And really rack your brain and make sure that you're thinking about all of those things that you do. And I'll give you another, I'm gonna give you like 3 minutes on this one. If that's okay. Yes, sir. You can go on the TikTok. Okay. What's the narration? Yeah, oh, we're gonna wish it. Do that. She wants to. Like, there's a lot of people. And again, y'all can look up whenever you're done. Is everyone finished? Okay, now what you're gonna do for your last sheet of paper is you're going to combine everything that you put on those other two. And whatever you have left, those open spaces is your productive time, the time that you have left to do things that have to be done. If you don't have any time left, any boxes left, then that might tell you a little something about your time management. You might need to cut down on those non-productive activities. Do I have any questions? Is that confusing? Okay, combine those on your last sheet, and I'll give you another couple. Ran out of boxes. I'll need to go out. Two boxes, like push. We're cool. When y'all are done, y'all can just look up. Give me another minute. But I'm also thinking that you may not be the best year. I don't think I can do that. All right. How many of y'all had at least 5 boxes open at the end? Like 3, 7. Okay. How many of y'all had at least 4 boxes? Well, hold on, how many of y'all had less than 5 boxes available? Okay. How many did you have left? 0? 0? Yeah? 2? Okay. So this is just an opportunity to kind of see all of the commitments that you have in your life, all the things that you normally do, and just have a little bit of reflection and think, okay, is this a productive way of spending my time? Do I need to cut down on something? Do I need to rework my schedule in a way that I have more productive time at the end of the day to get done what I need to get done? Do you have any questions? Was this helpful? Yeah, a little bit? Okay.
That's so
Dan?
interactive. Okay. Bailey, Kiana, are y'all still with us? You can give a thumbs up. You don't have to unmute. Okay. All right, I'm gonna be talking about what your role and responsibility is. And like we talked about a little bit in the beginning, that looks different for each person and your specific role on campus. But there are some commonalities in working on campus as a student worker or student leader that applies to all of us. And so that's kind of what we're going to touch on right now. And so I want you to think about how we best serve others. Emily wanted to talk about self and like where you are responsible for yourself in your professionalism and how you take care of yourself to show up for work. And now I want to talk about how is our role about serving others. So who do we serve? And this can be a variety of answers. Who do you serve in your role? What? Did someone say something? The community? Perfect, yeah. What else? Who else? The residents? Students? Incoming students? Any others you can think of? Parents. Good one, Danny. Anything else? I think y'all might have said them all. Students, both current and prospective. So those that are coming onto campus, maybe touring before they ever even become a student. Parents, faculty, staff. That's something else we do is we're working with our campus community as well as the community at large. Outside, we serve our neighborhood. We serve Jackson. We represent the University of Memphis as a whole in Jackson. And so I want you to think about all of these as we have this conversation. So what type of experience are we creating? And I want to kind of talk through these different examples. So let's talk through how we are a part and what our role is in dealing with a nervous first-year student. How might you be a part of, what does your responsibility look like when you're working with a first-year student? What could that look like? And you could speak from an OG, an RA, a DA, anybody could answer this. Make a connection. Absolutely. Making a connection would be a great way to spend your time when you're working with that first year student. And that's why you are in the roles that you are in. Like, we hire student employees, both resident advisors, people at the desk to greet them when they come in. OGs to guide them through that experience. The reason we hire you is to make connections. That's exactly right. What else? Yep, directing them, guiding them. Yep, that's the right word I would use, guiding them as a resource on campus. What about a seasoned transfer, someone who's done college before, but they've taken a turn and they're coming back to maybe staying closer to home, and they've decided to come to Memphis Lambeth? What might your role be there? Maybe they didn't get that information the first go around. How might you adjust how you approach like a first year student versus a seasoned transfer who's done a little bit of college before?
How different.
Okay. Anything else? Let's talk about a frustrated parent. Maybe they've had some obstacles in registering for class or with financial aid. That's a sore subject sometimes. Or maybe they didn't get the housing assignment that they wanted in the residence hall. So what is your role there in dealing with a frustrated parent? What else? That's right. That's right. So you can kind of keep calm. What do you need to be listening for? I would be listening for like, what is their need? What is the problem? Like, hear them, be a good listener, and then figure out how we problem solve and direct them to the right resource or the right person or the office. That's right. It's not necessarily for you to diffuse and figure out a solution yourself, but rather guide and point to a resource. What about a visiting alumni that comes to campus? Maybe they're just passing through, or how do you feel like your role impacts a visiting alumni? What does that look like? Maybe you're working our desk when they come through for an event. What do you think that impacts? What does that impact?
It shows them that the new things that are happening.
Sure. Sure, maybe it's an OG that might be your role, and maybe you have more of a responsibility to actually like tell them something, but also just the way you carry yourself, the way your attitude is, the way you present yourself on campus, and how you assist them with whatever that is going on. You are representing the university and their experience on campus. That visiting alumni is probably going to go back to their community or their family and talk about their experience at Memphis Lambeth, and you never know, that trickle effect might be like, hey, you should really consider going to Memphis Lambeth, or it's a recruiting opportunity, it's a PR situation. Like, everything we do really trickles down and affects other people's experience. So keep that in mind, no matter if you're dealing with a first year student or an alumni or your own student peers and friends. Okay, you have a responsibility, in my opinion, not just as a student, but a student leader and an employee, that you represent the greater good and the campus. And so we want our peers and friends to have positive experiences on campus as well. So they want to stay here and they want to communicate to their friends and peers that they should come here too and have a positive experience. So just know that what you do and how you treat others and how you interact and engage with these customers on campus impacts everything. Okay. Okay. So how do we meet a need? If someone has a need, what does that look like? And you can answer specifically for your area if you know, or it can be more general. So how do you do that? We've kind of talked about it a little bit. Okay. So that's contacting another resource and getting them help. And maybe there's a component in there of reporting or document it in the appropriate way. For sure. How else do we meet needs of our customers? Parents, students, visitors? Provide information. That's right. It can be as simple as that. Answering a question, pointing them to the next resource. Any other thoughts? That's a little blurry. Can y'all see that? Mine's a little blurry, so I'm going to make sure you can read these. So one, it says, if we're supporting and serving our customers, we need to first understand the customer situation and insert student, parent, whoever. In the library, you might even get, and Campus Rec, you get community members. People that are, I know in the Campus Rec building, they have a whole swim team that comes in and out. Like there are people from all over walking in your doors. So insert whoever your customer is, understand the need, understand the situation, manage those expectations. I tell my staff this, don't go ahead and have an answer and make a promise that you don't know and you can't back, right? Try to just collect information and listen, understand the need, and then provide clear communication. And offer access to the experts. That's you pointing to, okay, who do we need to contact to resolve that issue? Who is the next step, the chain of command or whatever? Be responsive. Make sure that you are doing that in a positive way. And going back to what Emily said, watch your tone, watch your body language. You might be having a frustrating day and then someone comes and is frustrated with their experience and you just kind of, you're not being mindful of how you're taking that information. So make sure that you are keeping in mind your role and your responsibility to hear them. If it's something that you maybe have made a misstep, let's say that in your position, you've given out some incorrect information, or maybe you have done something, and maybe you haven't even done that, but they feel that you have as a customer. I don't know how many of y'all have worked in any other type of customer service experience, but take ownership, whether you feel completely responsible for that or not, and hear them and say, okay, how can we resolve this issue, and how can I work to get us a solution and correct the misstep. Know the product or know the campus, know those resources, but then also I tell mom, be okay to say, I'm really not sure, but I'm going to help you find an answer. Or I don't know, but I know someone who will. So also be okay that you don't have all the answers. We don't expect you to have all the answers. So be okay with that as well. And then my favorite one, when you're dealing with students, whether they're a first-year student or they lived on campus for all 4 years, empower them to take the next step. We do a lot of hand-holding here sometimes at Lambeth, and we like to make sure people feel like they have nowhere to go, and we don't want them to get the runaround. I can't stand more than anything if someone comes to you and they're like, oh, well, just call that office. You'll get a hold of someone. You don't want them on a rabbit trail either. But make sure you empower them to create changes, or empower them to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves. Because if you don't, you can give them information and you can help guide them to the right resource. But if you don't empower them to do things for themselves too, then they're just going to come right back to you and ask you for the next thing. So it's really important in your job to try to empower them to work for themselves as well. Trying to give an example of maybe where this, does anybody have an example of maybe where that would happen on campus? Or maybe it's happened to you working with us before. Just any example of how you've met a customer's need. Has anybody got one? Okay, at the desk. And it wasn't working. Okay. Right. Okay. Good. So you heard a need and then you met it and you were able to do that yourself. What if you hadn't been able to fix it yourself? Yeah, so you would go up and figure out the next resource. Okay, I want you to think about who are your resources. Something that I hear a lot in a lot of leadership training is people are our best resources. Okay, so we utilize each other, whether that's a teammate, staff member, peer, your supervisor. Make sure that you are considering your chain of command. So who's next in line for you? So for those in the library, it would be Lisa Riley. For those being an OG, that would probably be Adam Johnson, or unless someone else is designated to be y'all's supervisor for OGs. For my DAs and RAs, it's Emily. Make sure that you are reporting things in the right way. I even encourage students who have issues in the residence hall, maybe that comes straight to Emily. Make sure you're utilizing your RAs. That's kind of why we have this step, or the DA. Those are in place so that they can troubleshoot on the ground, and if they can't get it, then they come to us. So make sure we're honoring those chain of command. And the expert of the area. I think it's important to know, I tell my staff, know what's your sandbox and what someone else's is. So we might be the experts in housing and student leadership and crisis resources, but someone else, like, I'll get a question about academic advising, or I'll get a question about financial aid. I'm not going to answer those questions. I'm going to point them to a resource and say, I don't know that, but we're going to go talk to so-and-so who can handle that matter for you, and make sure they get to the right resources. But we don't want to get into trouble answering questions that maybe we don't know, or miscommunicating something. So know what's your sandbox and know when to simply ask. It's okay to ask questions and ask up for more resources. And another thing that I think we often forget is in a lot of these areas, there's policy and protocol in place, and you can really lean on those. So maybe your resources, your policies. For my resident advisors, they can refer back to their manuals and say, like, okay, well, this is my resource here because I know what to do because it's laid out in this manual for me. Or the DAs have that. OGs probably have a list of expectations that they need to follow. So just know that policy and protocol can be your friend in that and really help you navigate a student need or how to handle a certain situation, but never be afraid to ask either, because we'd rather you ask than make it up or make a mistake, and then, you know, in those are going to happen, but we'd rather you ask. And so as part of your role on campus, I want you to understand that any type of student leadership position or student employee position comes with responsibility. What kind of responsibility do you think I mean when I say that? I don't think there's really wrong answers. So okay. What other level of responsibility? Okay. And kind of going back to, like, you represent the university, so you're speaking not just for yourself, and that's kind of what we were talking about, your own personal behavior, your representation online, social media. So you do represent more than yourself when you work for somebody. So make sure you're being mindful that you represent our department or your respective department and the university as a whole. What else is your responsibility? There might be some things you aren't aware of that we're going to talk about. Sure, absolutely. It is. We've kind of talked about all these areas, that you're a guide, you're there for relationship building and connection, you're there for support, help, assistance with the problems, finding solutions. Above all, making sure our students or clients on campus, parents, community members are having a top quality experience. We want people to walk away from here and have enjoyed their experience. It's not always going to happen, but we need to do our best and due diligence to provide that. But I think another component of our responsibility is a sense of leadership and service. And I I think that these go hand in hand. I think on a college campus, if we're not talking about servant leadership, then what are we doing? Okay. I think that we need to be gaining these skills, and you kind of get to do this on a smaller environment on our campus and in your student organizations and in your student employee roles. And it's only going to prepare you for your civic engagement and how you work and function in the world outside of college. And so we kind of touched on a lot of these things, but please be mindful that you are being a model of this behavior and having this servant leadership to display authenticity and be true to yourself and be transparent and honest. And so, like we said kind of earlier, we don't want you like sugarcoating it, but we also want you to put your best face forward when you're working. And if you're having obstacles, let us know. Please value people. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the program about how valuing all people and creating a campus that is safe and creating a campus of inclusion. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Share leadership, provide leadership, build community within your own staff and your own building environments. And this is where I would really encourage you to take it a step further as a student leader and student employee on our campus. And I know everybody feels like they have different roles in this, but I think we can all agree the importance of you all developing other people, developing students, because we want the next generation of leaders. We want the next class to step up and be in these roles. And so make sure we're modeling that behavior, encouraging and affirming other people in that. And providing for learning. And so we try to do this to you, and we want you to do this in the groups that you're in, whether you're working with freshmen who've just come in or you're working with your residents in Kearney Johnston. Some of you have a little more like ability to do this, but we really want you modeling that behavior so that we create a culture of student servant leadership. Okay.
That's another reason why speaking positively about your on-campus position is important. So as we have freshmen come in and we're looking for that next property leaders, if our current staff is talking badly about the position or about our different campus partners, then those freshmen that are coming in, they're not going to want to work for us.
That's right. So true. Any questions about some of those responsibilities we've talked about and what we kind of expect as a whole? And we can't speak specifically to maybe some of your other departments, but I think everyone who works here, we have the same mission and vision in mind, and this is what we hope to have in our student leaders and employees. I'm going to have to switch gears here because Jamila Harris could not be with us in person or virtually during this time, but she did have a presentation and a voiceover. So I'm going to switch to her presentation on your responsibility as it relates to safety on campus. Some of you might not be aware of this role you have. So we want to make sure you might hear it in your own individual trainings, but in the event that you don't, we feel like it's our responsibility as student services to make sure you hear this information. Let's make sure y'all can hear this.
Welcome to our session, Task Culture and Your Responsibility, Preventing Sexual Violence. In this session, we will review important expectations that we have for you as students, as well as challenge you to think about your role in preventing sexual violence. Well, first, we want to start by introducing you to our office. The Title IX Prevention Center's goal is to prevent and reduce the occurrence of sexual and intimate partner violence at the University of Memphis. We primarily do this through educating the campus community with trainings and events, and we also work closely with student organizations engaged in prevention work. The Title IX Prevention Center is embedded in the Office for Institutional Ethics, which is responsible for ensuring our campus remains an environment free from discrimination and harassment based on sex, gender, race, ethnic status, veteran status, age, and other protected classes. This session will be focused on preventing sexual misconduct. But you know, if you encounter any other form of harassment and discrimination, the Office for Institutional Equity at the University of Memphis you. So what's underlying freedom? As a student, you are entitled to an education environment that is free from discrimination and harassment in any form, including sexual misconduct. The federal government enacted a law in 1970 called Title IX to defend this protection. Based on that law, our university prohibits any form of sexual misconduct, including sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking, and sexual harassment. If you encounter any form of sexual misconduct when you are a student at the University of Memphis, you are able to file a complaint with the Office for Institutional Equity, referred to as OIE. OIE can provide resources and support to you. Examples of resources include putting another contact order in place so that two individuals do not have to interact with one another, moving someone to a different class, and providing academic accommodations such as ensuring that two individuals are not in the same group project together. OIE also investigates alleged violations of our policy. If a student, faculty, or staff members someone has violated a policy, the University of Memphis can take action for suspending the student or terminating a faculty or staff member's employment. So sexual violence is all too common, especially on college campuses. The University of Memphis is actively working to reduce and working on this effort. This session will review steps that you can take to reduce and eliminate sexual violence in our community, including modeling healthy relationships, understanding and practicing consent, challenging harmful attitudes and myths about sexual violence, practicing bystander intervention, and getting involved on campus to educate students on this subject. One of the most important things you can do to prevent sexual violence and intimate partner violence is to model healthy relationships in your everyday lives. One way you can do this is by practicing good communication. This can include having some important conversations early on in the relationship. The conversations you may want to have are whether the relationship is passionate or mysterious, what you want to keep private in the relationship, how often you want to communicate, and by what means. Another piece of good communication is being able to set and respect boundaries. This is important in not only intimate relationships, but also friendships and relationships you have with your family members. Boundaries are aligned in the same with you should know. The more you set smaller, everyday boundaries, the easier it will become to set larger and more difficult boundaries, such as when you want to have sex with someone. Finally, modeling healthy relationships involves being able to manage conflict in a productive and healthy way. All relationships will have some conflict, so it is important to establish fair fighting rules. We're just not focusing on who is to blame, being specific about what the problem is, and regulating emotions or engaging in conflict. Modeling healthy relationships sets the tone for those around you and can encourage others to have healthy relationships themselves, which in turn can have a cumulative effect of reducing intimate partner violence. One of the most part of modeling healthy relationships also includes understanding and practicing consent. Consent should be a part of everyday activities, and it is especially important in sexual interaction you choose to engage in. Often, when people think of consent, they think of this legalistic, complicated definition, but it's simply giving permission before completion. Another way to look at consent is the SIAM acronym. Consent must be freely given. You cannot force someone or force another person into something they are uncomfortable with. We know that a person's consumption of drugs or alcohol can alter their ability to make informed decisions. Therefore, they may not be able to give consent. Consent is enthusiastic. Voluntary and enthusiastic action should be what you strive for in an intimate or sexual interaction. Finally, consent is specific. Yes to one thing does not mean yes to everything. Good communication with your partner ensures you are on the same page about what type of sexual activity you want to engage in. You need to be checking in with your partner about whether they are enjoying themselves and about whether they are comfortable with the activities you are engaging in. Pay attention to your partner's verbal as well as nonverbal behavior. Another thing you can do to prevent sexual violence is to challenge harmful attitudes and myths about sexual violence. There are several things that have been disproven about sexual violence, including the following. Number one, sexual violence is usually perpetrated by strangers. We know this is false. Sexual violence is most often perpetrated by someone who is the victim. Number two, sexual violence doesn't happen to women. This is also false. Studies show that 1 out of every 2 rape victims are male, and 1 in 33 men experience attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. Number 3, what someone is wearing impacts their likelihood of being sexually assaulted. This is a common myth. What someone is wearing has no bearing on whether they are likely to be sexually assaulted. And this is an especially harmful myth because it places the blame on the victim rather than the perpetrator. Can you hear these myths? Or hear others making jokes about the subject? That's not going to challenge them. Instead of calling them out, call them into education and let them know the correct information. Speaking of stepping up and calling in, you can play an active role in stopping harmful behavior as it is occurring through bystander intervention. Bystander intervention is simply acting when you see something concerning. We will review 4 ways that you can act. Number 1, if you see something occurring, you can directly say something to the potential victim or person engaging in harmful behavior. You can ask, is that okay here? Or say, hey, that's not okay. Number 2, you can create a distraction. If someone is saying something problematic, change the subject. Distracting a person engaging in harmful behavior often gives potential victim an opportunity to get away or disengage. Number 3, you can delegate. If you do not feel comfortable getting directly involved, you can ask someone else for help. This may include someone with authority, like an RA, a faculty member, a bouncer, or a bartender, but it can also include someone from your playroom that may feel more comfortable addressing the situation. Lastly, if you feel the situation is dangerous, you may want to delay action. If possible, try to document it so that the situation can be addressed at a later time. We know that bystander intervention works. It is an effective strategy for reducing harm in our community. So we encourage you all to implement these strategies in your lives. Lastly, you can make an impact on preventing sexual violence by getting involved. Join a student organization. Follow us on social media and private ones to learn more. We want to conclude to reminder, as University of Women's students who are required to take an online sexual assault prevention course, you will receive an email in office via your University of Memphis email account directing you to that training. Look out for this training and please complete it at your earliest convenience. Also, if you Here is our contact information if you need to reach us. Thank you for your attention and we look forward to seeing you in the fall.
Okay. Are there any questions about those topics? There is a whole OIE office. Oh, I was like looking for the present. Okay. There's a whole OIE office, but our contact for incidences that occur at the Lambeth campus is Jamila Harris, and she is, that information on that last contact sheet, contact slide was correct. She's in Barnum Jones. She's also our business office, so she kind of wears multiple hats. And so what I think sometimes there's a misconception with, I mean, as all students, we have this responsibility to be active bystanders, to, when we notice things on campus, to intervene if that's appropriate, or call a resource if that's more appropriate, and if it's a dangerous situation, to notify whether it's security or whatever the situation is. We all need to be active bystanders and participants on our campus to create a safe environment. But I think the extra piece that I want you to remember, whether you're an official title on campus, I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I'm not an RA or I'm not a staff member in that office, so I probably don't have to report. But actually, in our language for the university, if a student sees you as an authority figure, then you are a mandatory reporter. So if a new freshman student, as their OG, if they see you as someone, you're in a uniform and you have authority, that comes with a level of responsibility. If you're sitting at our desk and you think your job is not really that meaningful when it comes to that, it absolutely is, because a student sees you as someone who has more responsibility than them. Does that make sense? So what that means is, if you were to come across information regarding someone being in harm's way, whether it's past, present, whether it's sexual misconduct, or maybe it's like a mental health concern where someone might be a threat to harm himself or others, that is your responsibility to take that information and report it in the appropriate manner, which might be your supervisor or straight to security, depending on the policies within your department, okay? But know that there is a contact for you in all different situations, and I've given you a student of concern contact list. This is a really helpful tool, whether you're a DA, RA, OG, library, campus rec. It can happen anywhere, and you're going to encounter students from all areas that might come to you because they trust you, and you're someone who, again, appears in authority. You just wouldn't believe somebody could sit down at your desk or be in your small group of orientation and just unload some information on you. And rather than you not know how to handle that information, we want you to be prepared. And so what I advise you to do is be sure that when a student does start to disclose information to you, that you let them know that you are a mandatory reporter. There are a few confidential reporters, which would be like a counselor, a mental health counselor. I know we used to have, like Wesley Foundation, we had a pastor on campus. They are confidential reporters. Is there anyone else that is? I don't think. A counselor or a pastor? Yeah, everyone else has to report because of your role. And so be sure you disclose that to students and say, hey, I'm here for you and I want to listen, but I want you to know the level of responsibility I have, and certain details I do have to share, which would just be that an incident occurred. And then what we would encourage you to do is empower that student to be able to make choices for themselves, because probably what they're sharing with you is a situation where they have felt powerless. And so we want you to empower them to say, okay, here are your options. I'm a student worker, I'm a student leader on campus, and so I have an obligation to tell you that this information, we can either go straight to police services, we can go to my supervisor, we can go to the OIE office with Jamila, whatever you want if you would like to report. And if you don't, that's okay too. But just know that I have to at least tell someone that I got this information. Does that make sense to everybody? You don't have to write down all these details and share their life story. You just have to simply notify your supervisor that that encounter happened, and then your supervisor will follow up. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about OIE students of concern? We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about each resource, but I just mostly wanted to make sure we don't have any overarching questions with that. There are no dumb questions, okay? If you don't have any questions, I'm gonna keep rolling through campus resources because I think we'll have finish up a little early to grab our lunches while we wait for multicultural to get here, and y'all can take a break, go to the restroom, eat your meal. So I'm gonna keep on rolling, okay? But feel free to stop me if you have questions. So we've talked about it several times, but part of this responsibility in your role is knowing the right resource to help students. And again, you might not always know, and that's why it's important to either refer to things given to you or ask your supervisor, ask a staff member, ask a peer how to best direct a student. So this sheet is really helpful. It tells you, and I've said it multiple times, but refer up and out. You want to get that information off of your shoulders. We don't want you to be responsible for that. And so we want you to make sure it gets up and off of you, okay? So if it's a student of concern, I have created some links here. Let's say that it's a mental health need and someone needs counseling. Let's say it's something that's not an immediate emergency, but rather someone comes to you and says, like, I'm just not myself lately. I'm just, with this pandemic, with what's going on, I'm stressed out. I'm having some issues with my finances. I'm overwhelmed in school. I'm super depressed, okay? If a student comes to you and tells you that, what would you do? Those are their list of needs that you've heard. So how do you go from there? Anybody want to share?
Take off and thoroughly listen.
Okay, great start. Then what would you do? You might not know, and that's okay. That's why we're here. Yeah. And Kel probably knows that because he's an RA. But good job, Kel. So before we had an on-site campus counselor, and that person moved into a faculty role. So at the moment, we actually don't have an on-site counselor, but we are in the process of hiring one. So that's good news. But until then, you can I sometimes get faculty staff call my office and say, I have a student that's in distress and they need some resources, and they'll walk them down to my office and we'll assess from there. I'm not a counselor, but I will point them like, hey, we can either go online and set up a telehealth appointment through Memphis, or we can find some local options for you to see someone in person today. If it's an emergency situation, do we need to go to triage and pathways? Like, we will assess the student and figure out, okay, where do we need to go from here? So your job there is to just get the student to the right resource based on what they want to as well. Yes?
Does this happen very often?
Mental health is probably what I see more of than anything. Yeah. Often, I don't know, I think what's your definition of often?
Like every semester.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just in this time of year, you'll see it peak because of it's the end of the semester. People are stressed out. They're running out of funds. I mean, there's lots of things going on in people's lives. We've just come out of a pandemic. I mean, yes, I think I see more than anything mental health concerns more than anything else.
Also, at the end of the semester, a lot of times students kind of heavily rely on their meal plan that maybe they had at the beginning of the semester starts to run out of funds, and then they're dealing with food insecurity, which is also an additional stressor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I'm so glad you asked that, because maybe this is such a good conversation to have. Maybe that it's not something you're dealing with in the moment, but there's people all around you dealing with that maybe, or maybe you are yourself and you didn't know that we had those resources on campus. And so that's why it's important for you to not only know that so that you can best direct students, but also want you to take care of yourselves. So that's what we're here for. And you have a lot on your plate. So make sure that we are not only just waiting for people to tell us those things, but I tell my staff, especially RAs, people that are a little more boots on the ground, is be looking for that. Let's say you're noticing someone in your orientation group, or you don't know those people as well, but let's say you're sitting at the desk and it's someone who's always coming in the residence hall, or always coming in the library, and maybe they're a little off and not acting like their usual self, or maybe they do some behaviors that you're like, that's just not like them. Those, I would really say it's your responsibility as a staff member, student leader, or just a friend to check in and make sure that everything is okay, and to just have a conversation around it and see if there's a need that needs to be met, okay? I don't expect you to handle everyone's problems, but it's just about being alert and aware and being an active bystander. So, but yeah, that is something we see more often, especially this time of year. And we'll refer people out, whether it's to a Memphis counseling right now in the interim until we have another on-site, or a local resource. And there's information online about that. And this is where people go to set up a telehealth appointment through Memphis, and that's free to students. They have free counseling. So many sessions are free. And then I'll work with students individually if I have to figure out what's the best local option, if finances are a concern as well. Let's do another example. Let's say a student needs a certain accommodation and has a disability they're having to work around, whether it's in the residence hall or in your class, you noticed, or in the library, having maybe difficulty accessing certain information. Did you know that we have a resource for that? There's an office for students with disabilities, and there is accommodations that can be put in place to ensure that our buildings and our learning environments, our living environments, all can meet people's needs and make those accommodations. And so there's a contact both on campus and in Memphis here on your sheet. Misconduct, if you see, we've kind of talked about a sexual misconduct goes to OIE, but if you have other misconduct you see, like someone, I don't know, breaking the code of conduct through, I don't know, defacing some property, or I'm trying to think of another example, or you see someone drinking on campus and they're not supposed to, and you feel like that needs to be reported. There's a reporting structure for that through our office, or online. You can actually anonymously report without coming to us and sharing your name. I wanted to point out this. I put insecurities because there can be a number of things and challenges students are facing, whether this is you yourself or a student you're helping lead and guide. Please know that we offer these resources on campus, whether they need emergency funds for, we have an emergency fund if someone's in a bind and needs help with their bills. If we have emergency food resources with a pantry on campus and a meal program to give people a little help, especially at the end of the semester when they're running out. If we need to arrange emergency housing, we have some local resources in place that we can call. All these are available, and if the student needs assistance in that, that is what we're here for. So you would direct them to our office. I'm trying to think if there's another example I can give. Any kind of safety concern that is like a criminal activity or suspicious behavior. Does anyone ever see those blue poles on campus? That is the same as like picking up your phone and calling security, and they will come, and it actually notifies JPD as well. So also don't hit those blue poles if you don't need an emergency. Like, that's not for fun and games. That's to alert police. So know that if you're on campus and you were feeling uncomfortable walking to your vehicle, or something occurred and you saw some suspicious behavior, please hit one of those blue poles or call. I always tell people to put security's phone number in your cell phone. I also think we have an app Isn't the Live Safe app? What all does it do? I know it notifies if there's like campus closing. I really encourage all my students to do this, but especially my student employees, to download the Live Safe app.
You can also request like a virtual escort.
Oh yeah, I forgot you could do that through the app. So download the Live Safe app. If we had a school closing, it would tell you, and then you can obviously contact people through that, but you can also put in campus security's number, which is 425-1942. And I encourage people to do that. And then there's some tips at the bottom that I would encourage you to read through when you're dealing with students in distress that I think we all can be reminded of. Don't ever promise confidentiality, especially as a mandatory reporter. Ask one of your contacts to see if it needs to be reported. If you're not sure, it's always better to err on the side of asking. Avoid easy answers like everything will be all right. You don't know that, and especially you don't want to diminish someone's issue or problem they're having. Be accepting and respectful. Do not minimize the situation, but also do not panic. Trust your insights and reactions. Attempt to address the person's need and seek appropriate resources, and encourage them to seek help, but also respect and honor what they value and empowering them to make decisions for themselves. So I hope that is helpful as we talk about how to deal with students in crisis. And know that reporting processes vary based on your respective department. So when you get into more your individualized training, they will talk to you about that. But as a university, there are methods for reporting students of concern online, mental health online. You can report those things in an online form, or you can come to our office. We're always a safe place to report, and then we can refer and connect that person to the right resource. And then security, does everybody know where security is located on campus? They're in the bottom floor of Carney Johnson. So if you need to visit their actual office, there's also guards on duty at all times. There's 2 guards, and they're more for watching cameras, escorting, locking up buildings, turning off lights. That's kind of their role, but their presence is important, and they're kind of eyes and ears. And then you have full-time actual police officers on our campus.
If you're ever uncomfortable with walking back from a night class or something like that, you can call security's number and they'll get their little go-kart and follow behind you if that makes you more comfortable.
Yes. And then facility issues. This might be a part of your job, working at a desk or working in a building, to notice these things and report them. That could be notifying your supervisor via email. I'm trying to think of something minor that didn't need immediate attention. Maybe it's a light is out. So you went ahead and reported that. But now something like a water leaking, that's not an email situation. That's more of a pick up your phone and call your supervisor of your building and let them know something's going on so that maintenance can hurry over. That's more of an emergency that we don't want to wait on an email to get through. But let's say you're even noticing a sanitary issue, maybe trash isn't being taken out. The building isn't as clean as it used to be. That's all our responsibility to kind of keep our eyes on and make sure we're kind of running on bare bones a lot of times when we're talking about maintenance and cleaning staff. So one, I also encourage you to know those people by name in your buildings and have a relationship with them. They are a vital part of our community, but we also have very few of them. And we want to make sure we're honoring and respecting the work that they do, but also know that we've got to kind of all look out for each other so that we can make this place look the best it can. I know we need help with that sometimes. We get in the day-to-day operations and then something gets by us and we're like, oh my gosh, we need to make sure that that space looks clean. DAs in Kearney, make sure the lobby looks great, because you never know who's going to walk in and be doing a campus tour. So just be mindful of those things, and let's all be a part of a team and making sure our spaces look the way they need to, and that facility issues and maintenance requests don't get neglected. I'll just give y'all some reference. We have 2 maintenance men that work for our entire campus. Okay, that's it. So like when there's a problem, you know, we've got to do our due diligence to follow up and make sure it gets handled. Were you
And
gonna
they
say
have
something?
specialization, so one of them is strictly heating and air. So when you're thinking about things breaking and lights needing to be.
It's one
replaced,
person.
it's one person.
Yeah. Yeah, good to know. And then I like to touch on this because again, going back to our sandboxes, we know what we know in our areas. And so let's be mindful as OGs or desk assistants or people in campus rec that when you get students asking questions about their academic advising, how their class situation, their financial aid, and how housing might impact their financial aid, or admissions questions, please direct them to the appropriate people and don't answer that question for them, or even if that's been your experience and you walk through that and know it. We don't know their individual financial aid needs. We don't know their individual academic advising needs, so we don't need to step into that. Does everybody know who those contacts are? If you had a student that had questions about their academics, who would you first point them to?
Chelsea?
Probably I wouldn't. Kelsey is someone who maybe they're having trouble with their academics. She does CARES and does like academic probation. That would be who I would point to. But if they're just having a general question about their classes, who would you point them to? What do you all have? Their advisor. You would tell them, go speak with your advisor first. Okay, that's really the best point of contact to start with. Financial aid, I wanted to update you. If you have a person who's asking about financial aid, and OGs get a lot of this kind of question, is we don't have that staff member anymore. Anna Marie moved on to another job, and so they're currently in the process of hiring that for as well. So again, just to the admissions enrollment office with Adam Johnson, and then he will point them to a person in Memphis, but we want to make sure Adam sees those needs so they don't just get routed to Memphis and not followed up on, okay? Same with admissions questions. You wouldn't believe I get questions about admissions when I'm at Kroger. And people are like, hey, I want to go to U of, I have a shirt on. I want to go to U of M Land, how do I apply? And I'm like, well, I can tell them this information. But I want to make sure I direct them to Adam's office to make sure they get registered and get all their details. That's not something I handle, so I can't refer up and out, okay? But people are watching what you even do at Kroger and ask about the institution. So that's kind of a full circle moment. So, and I'll kind of miss the days where I can wear a mask and a hat and kind of like hide in Kroger. Okay. Any questions about any of that, about campus resources?
Good afternoon. Oh, there's two people in here. Good afternoon. Y'all sleepy after eating? Yes, I understand. We just ate too. All right, so we are from the Office of Multicultural Affairs. My name is Ryan Wade. I'm a program manager and graduation coach.
I'm Chelsea Liddell. I'm a program manager for student inclusion.
And our fearless leader, Ms. Linda Hall. She's not going to talk today, but she's here. So we're going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity.
How do we progress?
All right, so anytime, well, definitely for this presentation, but anytime you find yourself in a diversity presentation workshop, if you're hosting it, participating in, you should always have some ground rules. So some of those are, remember that this is always a safe space. Let's listen proactively. Please no side conversations, no interruptions, don't talk over each other. Be specific and use examples. Focus on issues, not personalities. Be informative but succinct. And it's okay to disagree, but constructively. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And of course, we want you all to participate. Sound good? All right, so our office, Office of Multicultural Affairs, our purpose is to promote and advance diversity and inclusion at the University of Memphis by fostering vibrant, stimulating, and supportive environments in which students learn to embrace different cultures, races, ethnic backgrounds, and minority groups. I like this title. What do you like about it?
I am all different, ethnic backgrounds that
Anybody else? Sliding because it's colorful. All right, so in our office, we have 12 organizations that we directly advise. We have the African Student Association, Asian American Association, Black Scholars Unlimited, which is an honor society, Black Student Association, Empowerment of Color, Hispanic Student Association, Indian Student Association, Muslim Student Association, U of M chapter, the NAACP, Professional Assertive United Sisters of Excellence, Stonewall Gender and Sexuality Alliance, and the Vietnamese Student Association. We also support Lambda Theta Alpha Sorority and the National Panel Women Council. So, what is diversity without reading a screen? Anybody want to tell me what your definition of diversity is? Including everybody, right? Anybody else? All right, so diversity is the condition of having or being composed of different elements. I can also say the state of having people of different races or cultures in a group or organization, and a range of different things. So what do you notice about this picture? Yes, it is. What else? All right, you see some young and old. What else? So what? Different races, all right. What else? What about some specifics? You said what? I go, yep. Okay, definitely, yes. So various different aspects of diversity, right? How do we tend society? How do we tend to look at diversity? You can say it's okay. We tend to think of diversity as black and white, right? It's more than that, right? We agree. So diversity is a whole lot of things that we have to think about. It's not just black and white. So with diversity, you have a focus on increasing diversity. That might involve questions like, how can we get more diverse people into our pipeline? So is that your applicant pool for a job? Is that an applicant pool for your organization? How do we get more diverse people to be in the same space as us? How can we incentivize creating diverse spaces, that's offices, classrooms, campuses in general? And why aren't people of differing identities attracted to our spaces? Right? So sometimes those can be some hard questions, but questions that you have to process in order to make a diverse space. So, why is diversity important? I'm not going to tell you this one, so you got it. So that everyone feels welcome. All right, definitely. What else?
Introducing people to different viewpoints creates a more well-rounded person.
Definitely. So having different viewpoints around you helps you become more well-rounded. Can anybody piggyback off of what you just said? Give me another perspective around that. I just can't give a hint. To make sure that all cultures and races are represented, yeah. But being around people that are different from you in whatever regards brings in different perspectives. And so you can see things from a different view, different lens. You can get different ideas and maybe that you wouldn't have come up with, right? Because people have different backgrounds, upbringings, and they just view the world from a different lens, right? So maybe you have a great idea, maybe somebody else can bring in a great idea, and now you all can merge those and have an amazing idea. Have an amazing event, function, office, organization, workspace, etc. Right? Anything else to why diversity is important? You don't want to, I grew up in a small neighborhood in Memphis, and I grew up only around this one type of people, and I went to high school with this one type of people, and went to college with this one type of people, and I became an adult with just this one type of people. Probably haven't learned that much, right? So you definitely want a diverse environment. Any other thoughts? Any other viewpoints on diversity?
Moving on. Okay. So now it's my turn. Okay, so well, I feel more comfortable standing here. So inclusion is kind of the other side of the coin on this conversation. So what we run into a lot of times is people will use diversity and inclusion interchangeably. They'll use those words like they mean the same thing. It's important to understand that they don't. So you can have diversity. You can have a lot of different people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different cultures. You can have them all present in the same room, in the same organization, the same space, and people may still not feel included, right? So when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about not just having those people there, but the actual involvement and empowerment of everyone at the table. So all inherent worth and dignity, every person in the room is recognized and lifted up. So this is what's going to promote and sustain that sense of belonging. Someone earlier said, we want people to feel welcome. And that's what, when we focus on inclusion, that's kind of what we're looking at is, does this person feel like they belong? And does this person feel like that their voice is as important as everyone else in the room? So practicing inclusion is going to mean that we have to value and practice respect for all the talents, beliefs, backgrounds, ways of living involved, even if they don't match our own. We may not agree with something. We may not, know that much about somebody's background or the way they live their life, but we can respect it and we can try to learn about it. And that's what inclusion is about. So if we're in an environment and we're trying to focus on inclusion, some questions that we might ask, what's the experience for individuals who are the minority within this environment? Okay, we don't want to look at just the experience of the majority population. We don't want to look at, the people that are already comfortable, that's not what we're focused on here. If we've got people that are in a minority group, they have some of these identities that perhaps are on the fringes. We want to make sure, what are they experiencing in this environment, and is it a positive experience, and do they feel included? So that's our focus whenever we're talking about inclusion. We also want to look at a little bit tougher question here: what barriers stand in our way? If you've got people with marginalized identities present, what's standing in the way of making them feel included? What's making them feel like they may not belong here? And sometimes it's hard to face those things. Sometimes we don't, when people tell us those answers, we don't like to hear them. And sometimes it can be a challenge and a struggle to overcome those barriers because some of them are sort of ingrained in us. We'll talk about stereotyping and bias here in just a moment, but that can be something that we have to look, right in the eyes and overcome if we're going to create an inclusive space. And then another question we might ask is what don't we realize we're doing that may be negatively impacting these individuals in these environments? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we are creating spaces that are not inclusive and we're not meaning to do it. It's not out of malice. It's not out of any sort of conscious effort that we're making that we don't want an inclusive space. Sometimes we just have to kind of dig a little bit and say, okay, what is negatively impacting these folks here and how are we going to make it better? So why is inclusion important? We already talked about why diversity is important. Why do you think the inclusion piece is so important? What's that going to contribute to in a workplace or a school environment or, just in general, if people feel included? Absolutely. More likely to participate. You're going to get those varying perspectives, right, that we talked about with diversity that are so important. People are going to be more comfortable sharing their experiences, sharing their ideas and their creativity. What else? It's just what? Yeah. That's a good point. It's a very good point. Yeah, you know, diversity, like I said, can exist without inclusion. And if people don't feel welcome or feel like they belong, this is something I always point out. You know, think about when you're sitting in a classroom or you're at your job or, you know, wherever it may be. If you don't feel like you're heard, if you don't feel like you're respected, if you don't feel like you, your whole person, you know, who you're bringing to the table is accepted in that environment, you're not going to do your best. You're not going to perform your best. You know, you may not get the best grades in your classes. You may not, you know, perform, you know, at your highest level in your job. Some of us may be afraid if we don't feel welcome in our spaces. So you're constantly like anxious in your workplace. And so that's why inclusion is so important in creating these inclusive spaces and making sure people understand that they are in inclusive spaces. Not just saying, hey, we're inclusive and that being the end of it. You know, a lot of people can say that, but until you put those things into practice and have those conversations on a regular basis and do these check-ins and making sure that, you know, how are these people feeling right now? How is everyone in the office or the classroom or the campus? You know, how's everyone feeling? So it's not just like sort of a one-time thing. It's sort of a constant kind of check-in. Are we being inclusive? So this is a quote. Ms. Hall likes to say this a lot. I've heard it from her many times. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is actually being asked to dance. So, you know, you can come to the party and sit on the sidelines, right? You can come on to the party, you sit on the sidelines, watch everybody have a good time. You can never say a word and then get up and leave. But if somebody actually walks up to you and says, hey, you know, you want to come dance with me? Do you want to come, you know, grab a cup of punch? Do you want to sit down and have something to eat? That is what we're talking about with inclusion as far as this metaphor goes. Whenever somebody recognizes you and sees value in your presence. So this is a good one to remember. It's a really great little metaphor. All right. So I'm going to ask this question and then we'll get Ryan to talk a little bit more. So what do you think are some of the barriers to inclusion and what can prevent inclusion in everyday environments? Lack of knowledge. That's a really good one.
Barriers be like, you need to be afraid to ask.
Too afraid to ask about what?
Like, how to make people more comfortable.
Yeah. Because those are uncomfortable conversations sometimes, right? Yeah. Those are hard questions to ask. What are some other barriers you guys could think of? Or what about everyday environments? What do you think prevents, you know, people from feeling included in a classroom or in a workspace? What do you think some of those everyday things are that might make somebody not feel included? Sure. You can speak from your own experiences. Have you had an experience where you didn't feel included? Yeah. I think most people have at some point in their life, you know. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Lack of representation. Who said that? Hey, yeah, that's a good one too. If you look around the room and you don't see the people that look like you, or you don't see people that you think like you, you know, that can make you feel unwelcome. That can make you feel sort of on the fringes of things. All right, those are all really good ideas, really good thoughts. I'm gonna let Ryan talk a little bit here.
All right, so stereotypes and implicit bias. Do we know what a stereotype is? Prior to reading the screen. So a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. So safe space, right? Right. Who has been stereotyped before? Who has stereotyped somebody before? Right. So we all do it. Just something you want to be cognizant of and try to keep in check and make sure that it is not negatively impacting others, right? So with that, how do we get to kind of these generalizations? Actually, before we go into that, what are some stereotypes?
This always makes people uncomfortable whenever you say, what are some stereotypes that you hold? Again, safe space. You know, we're talking about it out in the open right now. That's what we're doing.
All right, so we'll do an activity. Don't be too many notes, so be a little bit nice. How would you stereotype me?
You just saw Ron walking down the street. You took one look at him. What would you say? What would you think in your head?
If you're too mean, I know where you're sitting.
It's a small classroom.
So some people, which I don't really think I'm that tall, but some people might say I'm tall. So do I play basketball? Right? Or maybe if I have on my glasses, if I look nerdy.
He is a nerd. That's fine.
I'm not a nerd. Let's see, what are some other stereotypes? We'll take it a little bit deeper. All right, so everybody can see I'm black, right? So, but to break the stereotype, and you all may or may not have heard some of these, like, I don't eat watermelon. You know, like people love watermelon. You know, I do love Kool-Aid. I do like fried chicken, right? I don't play basketball. So those are some stereotypes. You see, some are harmless, some can be harmful, but we all have ideas of what stereotypes are, right? So with stereotypes also is implicit bias. The first, the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. So what are your thoughts on bias? How can you be biased towards somebody?
What I always like to say to people is just like, think about how you identify, you know, as far as other groups of people go, you know, groups that you're not necessarily a part of, you know. It may be a different race or a different cultural background. It may be a different sexual or gender identity. It may be a different religion. Like, where do those ideas that we have, like, how do they get stirred up? And you know, what are some of those that you all hold? It goes kind of hand in hand with stereotypes, but what's interesting about these is that they're developed without our awareness. You know, sometimes we have to sit with those and be like, oh my goodness, I just thought that thing. Where'd that come from?
I think sometimes bias can come forward in our tendency to be drawn to people who are like us.
Mhm.
So sometimes if we're picking our friends, I guess if you're a new freshman coming to classes, you may have that tendency to draw yourself to people who look and act just like you. And sometimes when it comes to maybe working on group projects and stuff later, that can turn into a bias towards those people or against others.
Yeah.
So biases can go both ways, right? It can be favorable and unfavorable. So what's an example of an unfavorable bias?
I guess we'll listen to country music. I'm gonna get the funny television.
I appreciate your honesty. That's a really good example, though. That's
Anybody else want to give an example? All right, so what about a favorable bias? What's an example? Somebody I haven't heard from.
Come on, guys. Y'all be quiet all day.
I love awkward silence. All right, anybody? Favorable bias. What do you think?
I think stereotype and bias makes sense a lot.
So what are your thoughts on the two?
I don't know, like a stereotype to me would be like, if somebody were bald, you automatically assume they have cancer. Or would that be like a bias? Like, I don't know which.
No, that you're right with that being a sort of a stereotype, whereas it's automatic, like you just see somebody and because of their appearance, you know, you think. And so the bias, you can actually think that's sort of the mechanism that triggers your stereotype. You have bias, you possess this bias that has developed over your lifetime, from all of your experiences and your exposure to different people and different settings. And stereotype is this sort of fixed belief that comes out of that existence of that bias. Yeah. So does that help a little bit better? Awesome. Yeah.
We need to do jumping jacks. I gotta wait. All right. So the implicit associations we harbor in our subconscious cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people based on characteristics such as race, ethnicity, age, and appearance. These associations develop over the course of a lifetime, beginning at a very early age through exposure to direct and indirect messages. And in addition to early life experiences, the media and news programming are often cited origins of implicit associations. Pretty much everything Chelsea just stated.
So what do you think are some of your earliest exposures to bias? There you go. Your parents, right? Your family. So, the environment in which you're raised can often impact the way you see the world. And a lot of times what happens is we hit teenager years or we hit 18 and we get out of the house and we don't have our parents right there in our ear all the time. And suddenly the world's a bigger place, right? It's just like, oh my goodness, I never saw things this way. Or maybe this thing I was raised to believe I'm not as informed as I thought I was about it. Or, there's an endless, set of examples for that. But I always like to say I grew up in a small rural Arkansas town. I did not see a person of color in a classroom with me until I went to college. I mean, it was a very white town that I grew up in. And so once I went 3 hours away from home and I was exposed to diversity for the first time in my life, I was like, oh my goodness, what is this world? And I just wanted to meet everybody, I just wanted to meet everybody and talk to everybody about where they were from and, what their lives had been like. And it was just, my whole world opened up. And so I think that's why it's important to be able to embrace the fact that, we have bias. We are raised to believe certain things. We are raised to think certain ways about groups of people, but we can overcome those things once we're made aware of them. And we can embrace that process. I think that's really important too.
And so with that, let's jump back to where we were at the beginning. Again, why is diversity important in regards to this? In regard to stereotypes and bias. Why is diversity important? So everybody's a college student, right? You're away, even if you're at home, you're away at college, right? It's your job now to get into diverse environments, diverse situations, and to combat those stereotypes and biases that you might have developed over time, right? This is now the time where you retrain your brain to be better for you and those around you. So it is important to not only embrace diversity, but make sure that we also foster inclusion. Again, they are not the same thing. So we want to make sure that we understand that each individual is unique. None of us are exactly the same, right? Even if we were all twins, all 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of us in here, we're all twins, or whatever the number's supposed to be. We all would not be the same, right? Everybody's still unique. So make sure you are moving beyond simple tolerance. What is the meaning behind tolerance, or to say you tolerate somebody? Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? It's a bad thing. And it was kind of made to seem like to tolerate somebody was a good thing. It's really not. To tolerate somebody means I really don't like you. I really don't want to be around you, but I'm going to deal with it. And that's not an inclusive environment, right? As soon as they leave, it's like, oh, thank God. Like, that's not the environment we're going for. So let's move past simple tolerance and actually make sure we're being inclusive. Celebrate differences as a core strength. Again, being different is a good thing. Reject negative labels and study other cultures and learn from them.
So this last bit here, I just want to touch on a little bit is equity. This is something, we talk about diversity and inclusion all the time, but this is something that I've added into my diversity and inclusion presentations because I've had a request to talk about it a few times. So when we talk about equity or equitable practices or equitable environments, we're talking about making sure that we have approaches in place that assure everyone has the same opportunities. So for example, if there's so many examples. So say that there's a job that's posted and, you've got all your job, things listed out. You want to make sure that every single person that could possibly qualify for that job is made aware of that job. You want to make sure that every person who, has the education, has the skill set, has the experience, that they know that job exists and that they can apply for it. Education, equitable practices in education is a huge conversation. Be like, how do we make sure that everyone has the same access to the same kind of education? So making sure that everyone has access to those same opportunities. So equity, when we have these kinds of conversations, we're acknowledging that barriers exist and that privilege exists, okay? We don't all start from the same place, right? That has to be part of the conversation when we talk about equity. I didn't start in the same place that you guys did. Someone who, grew up in a different part of the country may start at a different point than any of us here from the South did, It all goes back to those experiences and the environment that we're raised in and just what's available to us from the get-go. So just a couple of examples here with some studies. So looking at hiring practices and processes. So they did a study of candidates, applying for jobs and pulling resumes. They would submit resumes with identical credentials on them. So same education, same work experience, same skill sets. And what they found is that candidates with, quote, white sounding names, like Greg or Emily, were 50% more likely to receive a call back than candidates who had, quote, African American sounding names. So like Lakeisha or Jamal. So that tells you right there that just from the get-go, somebody has the same credentials, the same education, the same skill set, same experiences. I mean, their name is what is, the barrier here. You can't help what your name is. Your name shouldn't matter. And so that's just one example, from a study that was done. Another one has to do with gender. Another one that they looked at has to do with gender. So they asked faculty scientists to evaluate some candidates, look at their competencies, and whether or not they thought they might be able to mentor these people and what their starting salary should be. So how much do we pay this person? Can you mentor them? And how competent do you think they are? And what they found is that female candidates with resumes and criteria identical to their male counterparts, they were deemed less competent, less worthy of hiring, they were offered less mentoring, and they offered them lower starting salaries. And so we know for a fact that women make less than men on average. I think it's like 86 cents to the dollar, I think is the last statistic I saw. So we know that's an issue.
How often have you heard the term equity? A little bit, a lot of bit, somewhat. Okay. What word have you probably heard more than equity? Equality. What's the difference between equality and equity? So equality is good, right? But is that really solving the issue? So let's say a really good example, and since I don't have the visual, I hope I won't butcher it. Anybody here really tall? Or like decently tall, tall? Anybody? We'll go with you. Anybody like decently short? You're pointing at somebody. All right, so let's say that if let's say I put $100 on top of that speaker, right? I don't have $100 to put up there, so that's something. But let's say I did, I really did. And I give you a chair and you a chair, right? Because you're short, you're tall.
We want to be equal.
That's equality, right? You both got a share. But who's more likely to get the $100? He is, right? So what will we do to change that from equality to equity? How will we make that transition?
You can stand on my shoulders.
Okay.
I would give her 50 and
What else?
It's a good idea.
Dangerous idea. All right, so it's not about giving the people the exact same thing. It's about making sure we're on the, like you said, the exact same playing field, leveling the playing field, right? So that everybody has the same access.
I was kind of thinking, I hear equity and like accounting a lot, and I was kind of thinking equality, I don't know if it's right. I was thinking equality is kind of on the same playing field, and then equity is like work,
You say equity is what?
when you work.
Equity work.
Everyone works different, but, and then everyone can be, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, equity has a little bit of a different definition when you're talking, because I've had someone bring this up who's like a finance major, and I've had them bring that up too. They talk about like somebody's net worth and their equity, building equity and.
So I think that
things.
works in a financial aspect. I wouldn't use it in a human aspect. I don't want to put like a word or an amount. Or, you know, how much is somebody worth? This person worth this versus that person. So yeah.
In the speaker example, their body is worth more to them than their opportunities is.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.
Not that anyone's like worth more.
Right.
Because they have, you know, one thing over another, but it's.
In that situation.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Good. All right. And then we have the conversation around privilege, right? So we talk about, you know, some things that may work against us. These are things that may work in favor for some people. Just some people, though. That's the thing with privilege. The special right or advantage that someone is given because of the group that they belong to. So only a particular person or a particular group of people will experience this privilege. And so some types of privilege that are listed here: socioeconomic, religious, gender, racial, sexuality, ability. These are all different types of privilege. So socioeconomic, we always talk about money can't buy us happiness, right? It can buy us a lot of things, you know, and it can buy us a lot of opportunities. I mean, go back to talking about the example of education. You know, a lot of folks, if they don't have the money to go to school, they're not going to go to school. If they can't get the scholarships, if they don't have a credit score good enough to take out a loan, if they don't have somebody to co-sign on a loan for them, they can't go to school. And so, you know, that's an example of privilege, where if you have the money, you know, the socioeconomic status and the socioeconomic, you know, the money there. But this applies to any number of things. Education is just one example in that vein. Religious privilege. I mean, we're all here in the South. What do they call the South in regards to, there you go, the Bible Belt. Okay, we don't call it, you know, the belt of any other religion's book, right? It's Christians down here, right? It's Christianity is the dominant religion. And so with that comes a certain amount of privilege. You know, you can go out and talk about your religion, and you can go out and assume that most people around you practice the same religion as you. And that's kind of, you know, a privilege. Whereas if you are a practicing Muslim person, you know, if you try to talk to people about your religion, you may have a lot more questions, or people may look at you, you know, with a little bit of hesitancy because you're a practicing Muslim. Gender, we just talked about an example, men versus women with pay, you know, pay race. That was one example there. Of course, race, we talk about white privilege a lot, especially in the last couple of years, a lot of conversations around white privilege. This has existed forever. I mean, it's just being of the majority race in our country, which, you know, white people, we're afforded a lot more things than people who belong to minority races. And so, again, endless examples of white privilege I could come up with. Sexuality, so you think about sexual orientation. If you are a straight cisgender person, it is, I mean, you've never had a problem getting married. You just walk into a courthouse, say, I want a marriage license, and ta-da, you have one. I mean, that's usually, you might pay a small fee. Gay people couldn't get married in this country in all 50 states until 2015, June of 2015. We still have a number, I mean, just recently in conversation, I mean, we've had a lot of conversations recently about transgender rights. The state of Tennessee, we just, you know, we've enacted laws to prohibit athletes, transgender athletes from playing sports with the sex that they identify, the gender they identify with. And so that's happened in Arkansas too. Arkansas also just enacted a law that says that if medical professionals don't want to treat you because of your sexual orientation, they don't have to. If it is against their morality, if it's against their religion, if it's against whatever reason they come up with, they don't want to treat you, they don't have to. That's a law in Arkansas now. It's going to be challenged, but it's a law. And then we think about ability. So if you're a fully able-bodied person, there are probably a lot of places you go every day. You don't even think about how you got there. You know, you just climb up the stairs, you just sit in the chair, you just get on the elevator, whatever you need to do. You just go to the restroom. But if you are a person who is living with a disability, you know, there are a lot of things to consider. How am I going to get in that building? Where's the ramp? You know, if you have a wheelchair, you may need to find the ramp. If you have to go to the restroom, is there going to be, you know, an accessible restroom for me? So those are types of privilege that sometimes we don't even think about possessing. You know, we don't even think about the fact that we can just go, you know, do all these things with ease. Yes.
So with privilege, it's important that you recognize that you might have privilege in some aspect, right?
Absolutely.
So that's, not everybody recognizes it. People know, but not everybody recognizes it. But once you recognize it, what is the next important step to do? Educate. All right. What else? Say it loud. No, that is right. I want you to say it again. Say the whole thing again. Yes. So, would you recognize that you have a privilege that somebody else might not have? If you're at a table that somebody else is not sitting at, you don't see any representation, they can't even get in the door. Utilize your privilege to change those things. Bring somebody else to the table. Make that representation more diverse and inclusive.
All right. So just sort of summarize everything we've talked about today. Diversity, inclusion, these are outcomes. So diversity, sort of looking at the statement here, this campus workplace is so diverse. We have such a diverse group of people present, different backgrounds, different races, all these different things going on here. Inclusion, we do frequent checks. I mentioned this earlier, it's sort of a constant thing. We have to check in. As far as we know, we have an inclusive and welcoming place for women and people of color here. So minority groups in general is kind of what they're hitting on. Equity, though, equity is not an outcome. Instead, it is about the processes that we have in place. So how are we consistently employing our processes and our systems to ensure that people with marginalized identities have the same opportunities as everyone else? The opportunity to grow, to contribute, to develop, regardless of what their identity is. So that's what equity is about. It's actually, these systems and processes that we have in place, to make sure that these things are happening. So like I said, just kind of a summary there. And then last question here, how does equity support diversity and inclusion? We have equitable practices in place. If we have an equitable environment, how is that going to support diversity and inclusion? Any ideas about that? So think about yourself if you are part of a marginalized identity, if you have a marginalized identity, if you belong to a minority group, okay? If you're doing research on a university you want to go to, or you're doing research on a workplace that you're thinking about applying to work in, and you see, okay, they either do or don't have these really great equitable practices in place. What's that going to do, as far as your decision-making process goes? Right, exactly. So if you're looking, if you're a person who belongs to a minority group or has a marginalized identity, and you see that their equitable practices are not really up to snuff, you don't really appreciate what they're doing there, you're not going to apply. And that's one more person that they now don't have in the pipeline, right? We talked earlier about, did I do something? Okay. We talked earlier about, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, we talked about how do we get a diverse population into our pipeline, into our applicant pool. And so if we are looking at, we're wanting to work in a place that has equitable practices in place and we don't see that happening, or this place, we read about them in the newspaper because of something they did or that wasn't favorable, we may not apply to go there. We may not apply to work there. And now you've just decreased the likelihood of making a more diverse workplace or making a more diverse campus. So anyway, this is sort of a summary of that. Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Do you all know what the popcorn activity is? I'm not getting popcorn, so it's not that.
Don't get excited.
Anybody? All right, so take 60 seconds and reflect, think about from the presentation with one word or maybe one short phrase. What did you learn? What did you rethink? What did you enjoy? Today's presentation. And popcorn, because you're gonna go. Boop, 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 boop. So everybody's gonna go. Take 60 seconds to reflect.
Mm, 40 minutes is not bad. I don't know what to do.
You ready? Who wants to start?
I would say that learning more about equity, I would say it's most interesting, but I haven't heard that word.
So, because I don't know how to follow different folks in societies. Let's say the difference in diversity and inclusion. The diversity is necessary because you need to.
To really have equality, you must have equity.
That equity is different than equality.
I think they're not everything.
That was super really interesting. I kind of hope we can incorporate a little bit of that, like in the way that, or at least a little bit more, because I know you guys are from Macon, right?
Yes.
And I've been up there, Stonewall, stuff like that. There are a lot more, like, I guess, opportunities for that, and maybe we could learn a little bit from the Macon campus. You talked about growing up in Arkansas, and I moved here from Arkansas as well.
Yeah.
So I know, like, I lived in Illinois where over half of our population was African American and everybody else, and then moving to Arkansas, and it was one
Yep.
African American.
Yep.
So the having to move down south into the Bible Belt and noticing this big cultural change. Well, I don't want to say cultural, but it was a really big change. So I think that like everybody needs this presentation.
Thank you.
I think learning more about inclusion and how important it is in the workplace or in the school setting.
Well, that is all we have for you all. Do you all have any questions for us? Any final thoughts, comments, concerns? All right, well,
Thank y'all.
thank you all.
Thank
Yeah.
It is a treat to hear from y'all, and to have you come to campus, and we appreciate the perspective you bring to our campus. And so we really do appreciate your time. Thank y'all for being here. Do you have anything else you wanna?
You will
Say
get
in your
an email if you check into the event, with kind of just a questionnaire, a survey about what you thought about this training. If you can respond to that, we would really appreciate it.